Hello, and welcome back to A Better World. This is your host, Mitchell J. Rabin, and I'm very glad you're joining us again today on a beautiful afternoon in New York City. The sun is out, the weather is warm, and the trees are singing, as are many of the humans around them. And that sort of bodes well for tonight's subject, which is nothing short of permaculture, human beings' relationship with nature, propped up, lifted up, elevated to a very high level. And our guest today is Michael Judd. We'll be speaking with him in just a moment. You know, those listeners to A Better World Radio with any kind of regularity, or the show on Mondays on Progressive Radio Network, Progressive Film Hour with Mitchell Rabin, know the subjects and the themes that we really keep playing, and that has to do with health, well-being, environment, self-care, sustainability, harmony with nature, and progressive thinking all the way around, holistic thinking, everywhere you look, integral thinking, up, down, inside, out, vertical, and horizontal. Because with thinking like this, expansive, imaginative thinking, creative thinking, we can develop a world of our own making and our own liking. When we look around, we see a world that is populated with, my God, it's fun to avoid the newspapers, I'll tell you. It's fun to avoid the television news as well, because there are a lot of people who have decided to make a world short of and lesser than the kind of world we'd really like to inhabit. So here on A Better World, it should be clear by now that while we do talk about some of those more painful subjects when it's important to, we really, really focus on what is going to beget more life, both our own human life and, nature's own life, Gaia's own life. Because indeed we are truly one and the same. We are part of a continuum of life itself. And so that's why these themes of health, well-being, environment, ecology are always, those are the chords that are always being played and strummed here at A Better World. And I'm just always so glad to have all of you from really around the world tuning in, listening in, and getting ignited by this kind of fertile dialogue and conversation we have here every week at 6 p.m. And yes, I do know most people do listen in archive, so whatever time it may be in your zone of the world, it's all good. Just tune in and lift the information and run with it. So on that note, I want to give a little introduction to our guest today, who is the author of Edible Landscaping with a Permaculture Twist. We'll be learning about what is permaculture. It's a word that has been in circulation since the 70s, and many people know a whole lot about it, and really a whole lot don't know anything at all. So we're going to be uplifting those who don't know much at all to the level of those who know a lot. How's that? So we'll be speaking with Michael Judd, who's a delightful gentleman who I had the pleasure of meeting at the Shivananda Yoga Center this past July 4th weekend, where we were holding a sustainability and permaculture conference, really. I was the MC and coordinator, moderator of panels, and we just had a very rich group of people there, fertile again, I should say, among whom was Michael Judd. Michael is the founder of Ecologia, Edible and Ecological Landscapes. He grew up between northern England and the Appalachian Mountains of Maryland. His roots have been branched with, what a nice way of putting it, only a permaculturist would put it that way, branched with diverse landscapes and fertile culture. Mix in a decade of running a grassroots, nonprofit in rural Latin America, heading up an arid lands research project in the deserts of southeast Spain, an extensive study at the New York Botanical Garden, you end up with an eclectic designer that melds form, function, productivity, all very seamlessly. And that is the author, Michael Judd of Edible Landscaping, who is really one of the foremost pioneers in permaculture in our country. So, Michael Judd, welcome to A Better World.
Oh, it's wonderful to be here, Mitchell. Thanks for the invite.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think well of your work, and I really wanted to highlight it here, feature it here, Michael, for our audience. We did have you on the other radio show talking about, was it dirt? No, it wasn't dirt, but you would have been great on that round table with Paul Stamets and Bill Logan and Bill Benenson, who was the filmmaker. But what was the show that we had you on?
It was on the Urban. Yeah, it was the Urban Garden.
Urban Roots.
Yeah.
The life of growing food and gardens in urban Detroit, and the way that is utterly transforming people's lives and the city itself. That's right. You were a wonderful contributor to that. So, Michael, how is it, first of all, if you would tell us how you got into permaculture?
Before I had learned about permaculture, I'd had the good fortune to live with some of the last of the Mayans, the Lacandon Mayans, which is the last of the tribe living in the stretch of jungle between southern Mexico and Guatemala. And I had gone into the jungle to live with one of these remaining communities to help design a compost toilet. And while I was there and while I was getting to build this with the community, I was learning how to harvest from their forest and got to realize that they were managing their forests for their food, for their fibers, their fodders, their medicines, their crafts. That it was actually this intricate agricultural system, but to me, or to most of us looking at it, it just looked like a regular rainforest. But they'd lived there for centuries and centuries without using it up. So I was fascinated at this sort of perennial agriculture and community use of it. And I brought that back to the States and landed in a permaculture community without really knowing what that was. Down in North Carolina, outside of Asheville, there's a permaculture community there that's being designed.
What is that called, that community?
Earth Haven.
Earth Haven, yeah.
Earth Haven, yeah. Earth Haven, it's called earthhaven.org, and it is unique in the sense that it's 300-plus acres and being designed to house, over 120 people, and yet, again, be regenerative in the sense that, they can really increase the productivity and increase the abundance of that land after living on it in a time, which is not what we usually see with humans' habitat these days. Landscape, it gets denuded, it gets degraded.
Yeah.
So the intention of this permaculture community, permaculture in general, is to regenerate landscapes, sort of create these human-centered ecologies that have all these benefits for everything and the human. Yeah.
Yep. So is that the idea, to take land that may not be being used for food, but is sort of near the habitat, near the home of humans, and it can be transformed into, as you put it in the name of your book, edible landscape?
Yeah, really permaculture can be applied to almost any landscape, except for maybe the poles. And in fact, permaculture has been used to great success in the deserts, in the areas of the world that are fast-moving forward.
I saw that in your book. I love it.
Yeah. Jeff Lawton is a real leader in the permaculture movement right now, and he is an Australian. And he's got some great videos out there, great YouTube videos, and a great site.
Yes.
Probably under his name, Jeff Lawton. One wonderful video to watch, which really kind of brings together a lot of permaculture understanding and principle, is called Greening the Desert. And it's 5 minutes long, and it's an older video. It's Jeff Lawton just simply showing how, by doing earthworks and shaping the landscape and doing mulch and perennial plantings, you can regenerate a space that was even as barren as a salted desert. So fascinating there.
What is earthworks, Michael?
Earthworks are just that, working and moving earth, usually either digging it yourself or if there's machinery available, shaping the earth, creating texture on the landscape. When you begin to move and shape the earth, you have the opportunity to capture and hold and sink water, to block wind, to create little micro habitats. You create niches, so to say. So really, you want a curvaceous, textured landscape. It creates a lot of benefits.
So in a desert, since you brought it up, and I think it happens to be really good because there is very much a notion of desertification taking place in the world, and some of it is actually way closer to home than any of us would care to realize, what with the dramatic droughts occurring in California and in Arizona and in Texas and in Colorado, and you could say a lot of states in the United States of America are becoming, it's too much to say desertified, but it's surely heading in that direction. And Southern California and Arizona have always been deserts, except they happen to have gotten, developed. But in reality, they're deserts. So what, if you have sand, how do you turn sand, then maybe even flat sand like in Arizona, how do you do the earthworks to cultivate then a rain sink, you called it, and do this work?
Right. Well, generally speaking, most arid areas of the world, when we say desert, our minds do go to the sand dunes in the movies, but those are a minority of what is desert and dry arid lands. Maybe arid lands is a better description. Does have some sort of rock or soil to work with and to shape and to absorb water. But basically, when you're doing an earthwork, a lot of time we call these swales. So swales on contour mean that we are digging out a basin and putting that soil on the downhill side and putting that perpendicular to the slope. So you've created this basin in this berm, and as the water comes down slope and it falls into the basin, it stops. Since it's on contour, it means it's level, it stops and it sinks in, and then it gets to be held in the water table. As compared to what usually happens is water comes down quickly and it sheets off. And it runs and it's gone. It's not held.
Okay, so you're conserving the water that's falling in a hole.
Yes.
In short. Okay.
Basically, yes. Yeah, you can stretch that hole out.
Pardon the crudeness of that. But, that's the basic idea.
That's basically what a rain garden is. A rain garden is basically a hole. It's a depression in the earth that usually has been added with sand and maybe really good organic matter to make it a fast-draining soil. I've just been working all day creating a rain garden, and basically it's this excavation, creating a hole and then putting in something that's fast-draining, a mixture. So when water comes across it, boom, it stops, it sinks, and you're holding it. You're conserving it in the soil. Now, regardless of if you're in a dry area or not, I'm in Maryland, and we have more than enough rain, especially this year. But we have a lot of pollution issues. We have a lot of runoff. All that water coming down and falling on our roofs and our driveways and our lawns is running off and into our watersheds, eventually into the Chesapeake Bay here. And this is an issue that's happening everywhere. And so
is the runoff, you're saying the runoff is polluted?
Yes, Absolutely. It's guaranteed, coming off a roof. Almost all roofs are putting off chemicals, on a hot day like today.
Okay. They're off-gassing.
Yeah. They're off-gassing, but, when the rain hits it, it's going to pull out some chemicals. It's going to come down the gutter, and it's going to fly across your yard, and it's going to go down into the drain, and it's going to go out to the rivers. So,
and that depends on what your roof is actually made of, what materials, correct? There are potential roofs that are rather more eco-friendly.
There are, but generally speaking, suburbia these days is made of asphalt and other types of, treated products. So generally speaking, ideally, yes, we're creating living roots where we're absorbing it and planting it and really holding it. It's the same concept. Again, we're holding the water, we're conserving it on the landscape. So as this water is rushing down, it could just be from your driveway. So you're driving a car, it's leaking some fluids, water hits that, it's going to run down. A lot of folks use herbicides and pesticides and fertilizers on their lawn. So when it rains, it's just sheeting off. So by creating swales, by creating rain gardens, we give that water an opportunity to stop and sink in and filter, and for the bacteria and the fungi in the soil and in the organic matter of these swales and these rain gardens, an opportunity to break those down and cleanse them before water is passed onward into our watershed. So part of what I'm getting at is it's not just for arid lands. This design, these earthworks, these water harvesting techniques on the landscape have benefit regardless of where they are. It's a big majority of the work I do here is that rainwater harvesting for many reasons, for the ecological and for growing your own food. So they really dovetail together. There's in permaculture what we call is multiple functions, stacking functions with what you do. So you're creating sort of a natural ecology of activity. Yes.
Could you go into, I want to go deep like this and discuss rain gardens and all of the other wonderful points you bring up in your book, Edible Landscaping, with a permaculture twist. But first I'd like to go into, Michael, a quick history, a thumbnail history of permaculture and the definition that you generally give it and the principles behind it. It began in Australia. Could you just give us a thumbnail of it?
It began in Australia, actually in Tasmania. Back in '79, a previous woodsman come professor named Bill Mollison and one of his students began outlining what has become known as two books. One is the Intro to Permaculture, a really nice, small, manageable book. And then what we call the Big Black Book is the Permaculture Manual. It's a phenomenal book and covers, all these different habitats in the world and how to apply permaculture design. Now, basically, permaculture design is looking at the landscape and communities as a whole. So how do we create human-centered ecosystems? So we tend to these days focus on just gardening or just sustainable forestry or just alternative energy. What permaculture does is it takes all of these sort of sustainable regenerative fields and puts them together in a design so that you have to consider them all at the same time when you're looking at the landscape. So the house you build has to be in relation to, how the water and the wind are moving on the landscape. How does it relate to the other aspects you're designing? It doesn't sit separately. So natural ecologies have all these different functions happening at one time to support a greater whole. And so it's taking that observation of natural ecological systems and saying, okay, now how do we imitate that pattern and create the needs for us as humans and stimulate the environment around us? So in a nutshell, it is a design. It's a very adaptable design. So you take principles and concepts and you can apply them in inner cities, suburbia, rural, arid lands, entire watersheds. I mean, one of the beauties of permaculture is its flexibility and its ability to be recreated. And it has been in many ways. The movement has flourished and grown, and people are using it in different ways. Some people add spiritual elements to it. They add in that sort of inner ecology and community. Others treat it as a very dry science, and it's like, okay, look, we're just going to be doing maps and drawing this, and keep the woo-woo out. But in the end, the concepts of the design still links together in the sense that we're trying to.
It kind of reminds me of, you could almost say, a feng shui of a landscape. And that's a little redundant, quite honestly, and I have to admit it, because feng shui means wind, water in Chinese, of course, and it's also the art of placement initially on the landscape of a property, a house, on a landscape, a dwelling on a landscape. So it actually in itself does include what could be notions of permaculture. But permaculture is a slightly more specified, I guess, branding or type of focus on the human-landscape relationship.
Yes, but I like your analogy there with feng shui. If you align yourself within the energies that exist, it's the same idea, with permaculture. If you can design your landscape to fit within the ecology around us, within the energies that exist, within the flow of water and energy and sun and wind and slope and just community and access, if we place our design within those flows, they'll be successful. They'll pretty much be fed by those systems that are already there. So we're observing that and taking advantage of that and designing into that so that it is fed naturally and thrives without us continually putting input into it. If you design something well, it will thrive on its own. In permaculture, the idea is that you initially put in quite a bit of thought and design and infrastructure. You do a little bit of install, and then once you've done your installation, if you've done it right, it'll function for itself. You're done. It will thrive. You have more time in your life to, spend with your children, do yoga, whatever your thing is, because your systems are now being successful because they're in the flow.
Yes. I want to share with you, if I may, my initial introduction to permaculture, Michael, which happened in around 1990. And I knew a woman who was involved in it and was somehow involved with the Museum of Natural History, and there was an event that took place there of, I think it was a film on permaculture being used in a certain area of Nepal. And a number of people signed up to go there to educate the local people who were, if I'm not mistaken, seriously malnourished and did not have enough food to sustain. And the permaculturists came in and looked at their habitat, which was really in the woods for all intents and purposes, but somehow came up with a design which placed certain plants in certain areas, and you're very, very familiar with this, in a way that so the soil was, for each of the growths, was complementary. So if there was more nitrogen in one and calcium in another, then they needed to interact, they would plant these things next to each other, and they would also yield food, nuts and berries and fruits. And so before you know, and they of course configured whatever little water was there in such a way that all of the plants near the habitat were getting their fair share of water. So it was this masterful architecture that of elements that actually were already there, that were just rearranged in this very interesting, hierarchy / architecture that allowed the area to flourish. I don't know if they brought in anything novel. I don't know, except for their ideas and design. I think that all of the elements were there. Does that sound like a permacultural kind of thing?
That sounds
brilliant.
like a food
forest. It's utterly brilliant.
Yes,
that's
what we call a food forest or edible, forest garden. Is a mainstay of permaculture and stands on its own as well. And is just as you explained, you're creating what we call guilds. They're basically companion planting that help fill the needs of your main food producers. So let's bring that home, so to say. And you want to plant a fruit tree in your front yard. Now, instead of just going out there and digging a hole and sticking it in there in the middle of the grass and let it fend for itself, the idea is, okay, let's plant this tree with its needs. Let's design this so that it's going to get what it needs, so we're not having to run out there and do it all the time. Mm-hmm. So we create this little ecology around it. So you go out and you plant your fruit tree, and you create this large mulch area, usually with what we call sheet mulch, which is layers. Some people call it lasagna gardening. And you're basically putting out different layers of organic matter. Oftentimes newspaper and cardboard are included in it to help, kill back grass and weeds underneath. And it brings up worms and turns into soil as well. So you're creating this layered mulch. You're planting your tree in the middle of it. And then around it, you're planting things that are going to fix nitrogen. Usually things in the pea family are used to fix nitrogen. And then you're going to want to plant something that's going to bring in pollinators, something like echinacea, and it's going to help benefit the pollination of your tree, your fruit. Then you're going to plant something that's also going to bring in beneficial insects, predator insects that will help balance the insect ecology for your tree, something like yarrow, with a really nice architecture to it. And then you're also going to want to bring in some kind of mulch plant, something that is going to continue the mulch cycle for you so that you're not bringing it in all the time. One of my favorites for this is comfrey. Comfrey has a very deep root which pulls up minerals from the subsoil into its leaves so that when you come and you can cut and drop it 3-4 times over a growing season, and you're bringing up those minerals and leaving them on the topsoil for the tree to feed from. So you basically created this little ecology for that tree to be supported as compared to just sticking it out there on its own. And then you can combine that by doing a swale on contour like we mentioned. You could plant that tree on that raised berm so that it is also getting that water runoff from your roof and from your yard and your landscape. So again, you're pumping that system naturally. And once you've designed and put this in place, and it's not that much, it could be just something that you've designed 15 feet down from your downspout of your house. You're going to do a little smiley face swale. On that, you're going to plant your fruit tree, and then around that, on the berm, go ahead and put in some other perennial companions. And don't worry too much if you don't remember which ones I've mentioned or are the right ones. Really just putting in, perennial plants will just bring in habitat. It'll bring in beneficial insects. It'll help just bring in more balance. So yes, what you described very articulately in Nepal is a food forest design, and it is based, like permaculture is, in an observation of natural systems. So how does a natural forest function? When you look at a healthy forest, it's very busy. There's all these layers. There's vines, and there's ground covers and bushes and mid-story and overstory trees all growing together very intimately, and yet being very successful, really creating a lot of biomass. And if we look at that and say, wow, that's very different than our concept of agriculture, which is rows, plant space so far, rows so far apart, and our idea of competition. But then we look at this and we're like, wow, that's really working well. How do we sort of observe that, take that pattern and apply it to our human needs? And that's what we just described. Put your fruit tree, your nut tree, your medicinals out there. How do we put these together? How do we observe that and use it for creating our beneficial habitat?
It's so interesting. I want to let everybody know that you are listening to A Better World with Mitchell J. Rabin, and we're on every Wednesday at 6 p.m., and of course you can listen in archive anytime, even at 3 a.m. if that suits you. And today's show is dedicated to the subject of permaculture, and we're speaking about that with Michael Judd, the author of Edible Landscaping with a Permaculture Twist. How to have your yard and eat it too. I love it. Michael, you bring such a beautiful light touch to the subject, and your book is just beautiful. I love the way you lay it out. It's got humor in it, and it at the beginning, of course, you say this book is not to be kept clean. It's supposed to be dog-eared and earmarked and used with dirt in the soil itself, reading it as you plant your plants. I love it. It's a real hands-on and how-to book. And honestly, I just think the whole underlying notion of permaculture is going to be becoming increasingly important as time goes on because, well, we see what's going on with water on our planet. We see what's going on with food sources that have been so industrialized and chemicalized and GMO'd, and while there are major battles being played out politically about all of these, still they have gained the upper hand across the board. And the idea of being able to return to local growing, i.e. in one's own backyard and front yard in this case, I think is going to become a seminal piece of our future. And comments?
Yes.
Yes, and yes, huh?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, it can only grow in importance. It's a tool that is, like I said, adaptable to the myriad of changes that we're experiencing and going to experience. It's not rigid. It's not set in any one way. It can be used as things change to those changes. It's not dogmatic. It does not have to stick with any one format, and I think that's what's important. And it's one of a host of things we're going to need, as times, become more challenging, and we need flexibility in design, and more thoughtful design, design that really is considering, future generations. And we can look back to how many of the indigenous peoples of our country, of the United States, and the Americas, use the landscape. And by observing and learning from them, I think we can bring back a health and an abundance to our landscape and to our communities. And I think it's going to take a while to get there. It might fall off the cliff first, but there's a lot there for us to learn from, and so much of it is just from observation. We don't necessarily need to have a guru or a person to teach these things to us. If we just begin to observe and watch and see how things in nature are working, we'll get the best inspiration we can get and the most successful designs for the change. The resilience in nature is phenomenal. And if we focus on that and then think, okay, well, look how that's doing it there, how can I apply that pattern, that understanding, what we call sometimes biomimicry. How do we observe that? And then how do we now overlap that to our situation, to our habitat, to our reality? And we'll have much more success when we use those models.
Yes. Will you talk a little bit about biomimicry? Another favorite subject of mine. You're hitting all the points.
Well,
I'm getting ticklish.
I've not particularly studied or read on the subject of biomimicry, other than what I've just explained, in the sense that observing how there are natural patterns around us all the time, from the microscopic, from looking at, the patterns on a turtle shell, to, looking at dendritic patterns of roots and, how water moves on the landscape. Those kind of patterns are a core part of permaculture. And I think one of the influences for permaculture was a book called Pattern Language. And this book delves into the understanding of using pattern
design.
Who is it by? Oh, I knew you were going to ask me that, and I know, but it's just it'll pop out here in a little bit. I'll figure it out.
Okay, fine. Anyone listening, please weigh in.
Yeah, it'll pop out.
Sure.
But wonderful. And it goes into observing and talking about and applying it to our human architecture and landscapes and communities.
Christopher Alexander. Alexander, who I have read. I didn't recognize the name of that book. Please pardon my ignorance. But
no, thank you.
He is one of the awesome commentators and theorists on landscaping and the relationship of man to nature. Truly one of the leading thinkers.
And I think a big influence in permaculture as well. And, when I first got into permaculture and people were talking about patterns, it didn't really click for me what they were talking about. Mm-hmm. And I think over time, by doing simple projects, by imitating, a good example is hugelculture. Now, hugelculture is an ancient practice with a modern word, a Germanic word, that basically means wood covered with soil. Mm-hmm. Now, if we look back or if we observe a natural healthy forest again, it'll look lumpy. It'll have all these humps and dips in it, and those are old trees that have fallen and over the seasons have been covered with leaves and are slowly turning back into soil. Mm-hmm. So that's a pattern. That's just simply a pattern. There's a natural pattern occurring. So how do we observe that on our landscape? So we have all this wood coming off our landscapes, not everyone's, but certainly around here. We have a lot of wood. And most people are putting it on their curb to be picked up and taken to the dump. They're getting it, they're removing it from their land. Whereas that's a resource. And if we imitate that natural pattern by covering them with soil and being patient, letting some seasons pass, that wood in there will break down and create amazing fertility and moisture for whatever we would like to plant in it. So patterns can be quite simple. They don't have to be this complex understanding. And if you go and read Christopher Alexander's book, you might get overwhelmed.
It's a bit complex, no question about it. And following that same notion is a quote from inside your book that I just giggled at when I came across it under fungi, or I should say fun guy. And it is the founder, I think, of Field and Forest, who you quote as saying, "Proud to be part of this rotting world," in respect to the use of and the role of fungus in nature. That was great.
Yes. Yeah. And
what you're talking about, even with the hugelculture, is, it's part and parcel of the rotting process and mycelium. Maybe talk about that a little bit as well.
Oh, I would love to talk about mycelium and fungi. It is, as Paul Stamets has pointed out, a keystone species. Who we've
had on the show a couple of times,
Which is fantastic. He's one of my heroes.
Great. He's a great guy, sure.
And I'll put a plug in for his TED Talk. It is phenomenal. If you can go to YouTube and plug his name in, Paul Stamets.
Right.
And give 18 minutes.
Stamets.
Yes. If you give 18 minutes of your life listening to his talk, you will be very rewarded in understanding and seeing the magic and the reach that mushrooms, that fungi have in our world. And we would not exist without them. And understanding that relationship with fungi is really one of the keys to our continued existence. And I think the more we understand that, the more we will honor and work with fungi. And yes, fungi are the key ingredient in breaking down soil. You know, when a tree dies, the first decomposers on the scene are the fungi, the fungus, and they're beginning the process of turning that into soil. So we can interact with that. And hugelculture, that covering wood with soil I'd mentioned, that's what you're doing. As soon as you allow wood to be moist, to stay shaded, fungi are going to move in and start that process and begin, you know, creating fertile soil. So there's many ways we can work with fungi.
The entire formation of soil is just one of the most phenomenal things, you know. And I also want to do a shout out, so to speak, to the makers of Dirt. First, the book by Bill Logan. Are you familiar with it?
Yes, I am.
Dirt. I mean, I just loved it. And then Bill Benenson, as I mentioned before, made a film of it. In fact, we're going to have him on A Better World Radio, too. And Bill Logan is right here in Brooklyn, in New York City, and does a lot with landscaping across the city in different ways. But, you know, the importance of dirt has just been so forgotten when, in fact, it's the thing around which and about which wars are fought. This is what it is. It's, you know, he says, who cares about the word soil? Go for dirt, man. It's way more fun to say. I like that point of view. But, you know, this notion that you're speaking of the earthworms and the wood rotting and fungi and mycelium running, the name of Paul Simon's book. You know, also just to say, you used the word dendritic before, which was wonderful, and I'm thinking, of course, that a root system of a tree underground is very much similar to the dendritic system of brain matter in our skull.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Yes.
That's how rooted, no pun intended, we are in the soil. I'd like to ask you another question, because along this very same idea of making soil, earthworks, I now understand it to be as well, we use things as cow dung and horse dung. I'm just wondering, in other words, using whatever resources rather than removing things that are on the ground because we think that they're in the way and then hauling them off to another locale. I wonder, would human waste, as we call it, be also potentially, except for that it's gotten so contaminated based on the foods we eat and all sorts of things, but would it not also, if things were a little purer, be playing a role just as we use horse and cow dung to increase the fertility of the soil?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there's a great book out there called Humanure by Joe. It's a great book, full of humor, but really hitting the mark with, you know, how do we use this amazing resource? It's by Joe Jenkins. And absolutely, in many different ways, whatever your comfort level is. You know, there's even these really nice, posh manufactured models these days that have fans, and you know, there's no odor, and it creates this perfect compost when you're done. You know, it can be used out there around your fruit trees. You know, very benign. Basically, if you are composting it to a certain heat, a certain temperature, you are assuring that it is then a safe material to use. And absolutely, we should be using it. And the opposite is,
in a sense, it's weird that we're pulling it out. We're pulling it out of the ecosystem.
Absolutely, and we sort of are operating in a linear way, where if you imagine a straight line, you know, raw materials are coming in, they're coming through us or our home, and then they're continuing out into, you know, the garbage. Instead, take that straight linear line and curve it and create a circle, how we can, you know, make sure that we're in a cycle where we feed back what we are receiving.
Yes.
Human manure is a critical part of that cycle. We cannot keep consuming and taking without giving back to it. We are going to run out of materials. So the human manure aspect is in Joe Jenkins' book, he talks about how in China, along some of the rural stretches of highways, farmers will build these elaborate, beautiful, temple-like compost toilets along the side of the highway, and they're in competition. They're vying for your human manure. They want you to stop and be comfortable, enjoy yourself, and please leave us your valuable human manure. And they really understand and value that. So really, as a culture, we've got to get that right. And just imagine New York City, and maybe this has already happened, after 4 days of no flushing toilets.
Yeah.
No water. So electricity's gone for more than 3 or 4 days. Toilets aren't flushing. I mean, what a nightmare. And something that's avoidable if we had a system. And, of course, you need a system for this. But what a regenerative system that would be.
Yes, exactly. No, I'm glad I'm on the path of what you're... What? Excuse me?
We cover the gamut here, human manure.
Yeah, right, exactly. Well, since you mentioned the Chinese and their temples, that kind of temple, it's also true that urine has certain constituent elements that are used in the highest end perfume on the shelves of Bloomingdale's and Saks Fifth Avenue. And a lot of the raw material is culled from urinals in Beijing and the other leading cities across China.
What?
Because pretty wild, huh?
Yes. Yeah, I've been to some of those toilets. I've been to Beijing. I've been to the community toilets, and it does not smell very attractive, no.
No, exactly. They don't. I wasn't thinking about smell at that moment. But after I'm talking about the urine. It's harvested, basically. It's harvested. And I came across this in a book about the use of urine as nutrition. What is the name of the old ancient practice of
drinking it?
Yes, exactly.
There is it's quite alive. There's definitely people.
Urinotherapy. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, urine therapy. Drinking it. But for landscape use, it is pure urea. It is pure nitrogen. What farmers are going out and buying as nitrogen is urea, and urine is pure in that form, very strong, to where you need to dilute it to use around your plants. So, as you're pointing out, it has a lot of benefits. And yet, what are we doing? We're peeing into
flushing it down the toilet.
our fresh water supply. Whereas, we could turn that into a cycle and into a use. And that's one of the things you could actually use on a small scale, suburban, urban. You can use your pee and dilute it about 10-to-1 with water, and use it on your house plants, use it on your plants outside. It's not going to smell at that rate. And, you can begin to feed your plants. And
what do you say? The urea helps to stimulate nitrogen, or what was that?
It is nitrogen. So it is definitely
nitrogen.
going to make your plants very happy. Yes, you will see a marked difference. Your house on the block is going to be a shining example of landscape urine therapy.
Folks, you get that? Start using your pee. Right? Yeah. Don't flush it away.
You can put a little sign out on your lawn. This lawn is
that
fertilized
is
by
wild. Have you come across, Michael, any of the deleterious effects of GMOs in the projects that you've been working on with permaculture, either in terms of seeds or effect on soil or water? Have you?
Well,
what do you come across, if anything?
GMOs are still playing themselves out for long-term effects, but a lot of the sterilized seeds and things Monsanto are working on, these are having immediate effects. In my time living in Latin America, very immediate in that farmers who traditionally saved their seeds and had a long history of genetic diversity in those seeds have been encouraged to buy, these Monsanto seeds that are sterile. So meaning that they have to plant them. So they plant corn, sterile corn, and it doesn't produce a seed that can be planted again. So you have to go back and keep buying.
Terminator seed, as they call it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the whole idea. So you keep going back and you keep buying, and then you very quickly have lost the seed genetics that you had. And I've seen a lot of, nutritional and landscape devastation due to that throughout Latin America. But GMOs, I think we're still waiting to see, and maybe we are seeing it in ways we don't, quite identify yet. And some of the dysfunctions and health and things we're seeing around us. I think it's collective. I don't think it's any one thing that's creating a lot of the challenges that we're seeing in our culture and our children. It's this collective effect of GMOs, of all these vaccines, of all the high fructose syrup and the lack of good nutrition in our food and just air pollution. It's collective. Yeah. Yes. It's a whole picture.
And not to mention the EMFs and the monitors and, the computerized everything. And none of that goes to say that monitors aren't useful with computers. We love them. But, my God, what about something called balance,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, getting out in the landscape and getting, just starting a small project. And that's what my book is about, is making, this approachable and fun, not to be overwhelmed by, I have to understand this and I have to have all these concepts together before I begin doing something on my landscape. No, pick a simple, fun project and go out and start interacting with your landscape, and it will guide you. It will help to heal you. It will teach you. It will be a blessing no matter what. And I think people think they need to have an understanding before they go out there. And really the understanding is gained. Yeah, the understanding is gained as you get your hands dirty. Pick up a simple guide.
Just do it. Right.
I'm all about
Talk about, before I let you go, I'd love to hear you just share a little bit about edible ovens, earthen ovens.
Yes,
and then tell us a little bit about Ecologia.
Right. Earthen ovens are an age-old tradition around the world, and it's basically building your ovens out of earth, if you have it, sand, and some kind of organic matter, whether that's usually chopped straw or something. And instead of what we traditionally see, which is bricks, we usually see a pizza oven or something made out of brick. What we are doing is free-forming that shape, but we are also adding in insulative layers that are thick and rich with straw or some other type of material like that helps insulate the heat. If you have a brick oven and you fire it, that heat goes right out. It flies right out of the brick. So you're constantly feeding it. Yes, you're giving a lot of energy into it, your own, more wood, whereas these earth and cob ovens can be very insulative. And so the idea is that you have a fire in there for, depending on the size, about an hour and a half. And then if you're going to make pizza, you would just push those coals as it dies down a bit to the back in sort of a half moon. And then you would just slide your pizzas in and out. Within 2 minutes, those pizzas are cooked, and they are delicious.
For 2 minutes?
Really? 2 minutes. They're flat. Even sometimes quicker when the oven's really hot. I mean, and it is a party. And there's something about fire, food, and these earthen ovens that draws people to them. They're a real center for activity.
Wow. We all have like no matter the hearth. It's the hearth.
Yes.
Exactly. Which, of course, has the word heart embedded. Yeah.
Yes, and it's true. It really brings
Yeah.
community together. We always have one wherever we live, and the last chapter of my book is dedicated to how do you build one of these, and they are fun and simple.
What's the outer layer? If you have straw on the inside, what's covering and protecting the straw from the fire?
Well, your first layer is this almost the same mix as you would to make bricks. It's just clay, subsoil, and sand. So there's no organic matter in your first layer, which is about 4 inches. So what we do is we get damp sand and we create an egg shape. And that's the form that we're going to work around. So we build these layers around that sand form. So the first one is 4 inches, and it's this sand and soil mix. And then the next layer is a very organic, rich layer. So we'll make a mud slurry. We'll take mud and water and make like a milkshake. And then we'll dunk our straw in it and let it soak it up, and then we'll pack that. And that'll become like sort of this honeycomb of straw. And that's your insulative layer. And then the final layer is going to be sort of your plaster, which can be, again, your clay soil, your sand, and finely chopped organic matter straw. And you cover it with that. And then you pull the sand out. That sand, that's just your form. It's kind of like a balloon for, making a piñata. You're just going to pull it out then. And then you let it dry, and you're ready to go. It's so much fun. I mean, you're playing with mud. It's like you've been given license to be a kid again. And to boot, you get this wonderful
pizza
sort of we use edible architecture too on your landscape. That's very drawing and attractive and interesting. And you can cook anything that you would in a conventional oven in this oven, but it will taste 10 times better. Makes the best bread. You can put birds in there, and you can, as the heat diminishes, you can do different things. You can do cookies, and then at the last bit of heat, you can dry fruits in it. It really becomes this super useful and fun part of your landscape. So I recommend, even if it's just a small little throw together in a weekend one, to go for it, because they are fun. And I detail how to do it in my book. All the chapters, all the subjects in my book are how-to. So how do you go out in the landscape and begin doing these fun, productive projects?
Yes, right.
And then you asked about Ecologia.
I did, Ecologia, Tell us a little bit about what that is.
That's a Portuguese word for ecology, and sort of the tagline with it is edible and ecological landscapes. Yeah. And it's a business I started here in Maryland, the D.C., Baltimore area, when I moved back from Latin America about 4 years ago. And really made a translation of what I'd learned living with the Mayans and living in rural Latin America, working with food forests and understanding, how to work with water and all these permaculture practices and patterns. And I brought them back here to suburbia, and I'm like, okay, how do I adapt these so that it is, attractive and functional to where I am? Where are people ready to meet this idea and really accept it and have it accepted by their neighborhood, their HOAs, all of these important things to us culturally here. Yes. And so the business has really taken the permaculture ideas, these functional landscapes, and made them beautiful, really made them sexy. I mean, really, we've done really amazing designs for high-end restaurants, beautiful yards, front yards, things that are very productive yet very attractive. And really that's where people are ready. A lot of people are ready, and I think permaculture sometimes can get a bit of a ratty image if it's not done with a little bit of aesthetics in mind. And then it depends where you are. If you're out in the homestead and you're out in the country, then that's fine. Imitate your zone. If you're in suburbia where majority of people are living these days, adapt it, make it attractive, make it so people really want to interact with it and actually do it, because that's the bottom line. We need to see this change in the landscape. We need to see, this runoff we spoke about. We need to see this captured and harvested and cleansed here and now. And how do we do that? How do we put our own ideas aside a bit and meet people where they are and make it so that they enjoy it and love it.
That is wonderful. That is wonderful. Michael Judd, you're just doing such beautiful work. It's simple. It's, pardon the expression, down to earth. It's just got a nice, what we say in Chinese, a nice vibe. I know that doesn't sound like Mandarin, but in another universe it is. And it's just, no, it really is. It's just, it's very grounding. It's very useful. I brought up the implication that has a kind of a larger sociological implication that permaculture offers us, and in general, and through your work in particular, the opportunity to become self-reliant and self-sustaining outside of reliance on big ag and even just the local food store down the block. I mean, the idea of having an edible landscape, and that can even be done in urban environments, in windows, in cities, and on patios and rooftops. It's all just the activation of the imagination, which I was speaking about at the very opening of the show. And your work and that of the larger permaculture community really exemplifies that kind of resourcefulness and creativity. And I really think it's a real gift to people and the planet. So thanks for your good work.
Agreed. Yes, thank you. Very well said. And I think a lot of people don't think that they have the understanding to begin doing it, and it really is something that most of us have access to, whether it's in our own space or communal space or an abandoned lot. There is an opportunity for us to begin becoming more independent, more resilient, and less dependent on the current food system, the store down the street. And it doesn't have to be that radical. You can just start and learn and do a little bit, get that experience.
Step by step. That's right.
And you'll be drawing in others with a similar interest, and you'll be drawn to others doing similar things, and you'll begin to form and create some sort of community that really is one of the most important aspects of resilience. And the coming times and changes, the strength we need is with community and with each other. It's not having this very productive landscape. That'll get run over and overnight. Yeah. Everyone will tear it apart. But if you have community, you have a strength there that will help see you through challenging times. So it kind of starts to get out there and scratching in the earth.
Exactly. You could say changing the world, earthworm by earthworm and mushroom by mushroom.
It can be that simple. I think Jeff Lawton, one of his quotes is, all the problems in the world can be solved, in the garden.
Yes, it's really true. It reminds me of a quote of Buckminster Fuller's, which I'm not getting completely right now, but basically, if you can't change yourself, change the environment that you inhabit, and that in turn will change you. It will improve you. We have a whole lot more access, it seems, in general, to the world outside of us than to the world inside us. Now, many of us are trying to alter that, believe me, but in general, we're very outward-oriented, so a garden is a wonderful place to begin one's inner gardening. So,
yes,
Michael Judd, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Absolutely. Your website for our listening audience?
Our website is ecologiadesign.com, and we have a wealth of information and images there. Our book is on there, And upcoming, we are working on a new book, a new publication called A Guide to Backyard Mushroom Growing. And
Wonderful.
It is just that. It is how do we begin growing and working more with fungi in a fun, simple way in our homes, our apartments, really just kind of showing how easy and fun it is, and tons of benefits. So that's going to come up soon. We're going to do a Kickstarter for that starting here next month, a couple of weeks. And
beautiful.
Yeah, hope to build some community around that as well.
When it's done, we'll have you back. If not,
great. Hey, I could talk about fungi and mushrooms, for hours.
For a long time.
Please
exactly.
do.
Oh yes, indeed, and they have many values that we're not going to go into now. But Terence McKenna was certainly one of my teachers, and I've learned about some of the benefits of mushrooms that go body and mind, not to mention soul. So your words are well spoken, as are those of Paul Stamets and his mycelium running, and we really have to take stock of what creates and what destroys, the way the ancient Vedantic understanding taught us, that both are part and parcel of the same organic process, and we need both in hand. So
yes. If we have, do we have time? How much time do we have to speak? Is there a limit or? Oh, okay. I was just going to touch on the subject.
Please.
That you brought up. That cultures are born of their environments. Historically, it was more obvious. Cultures that were born, from the seaside, from the mountains, from the more arid areas. They were, they shaped the people, they shaped the culture. And these days, if we look at what's shaping our culture, we see that it is reflecting on, our landscape and our usage of automobiles and cars and phones. And if we want to shift our culture again, we need to change our landscape. If we can't change ourselves, begin to shift and change our landscapes more. And in the process, we will be changing. But we will also be creating an environment that creates strong roots for a new culture, a culture that will be strong and resilient to the times that are coming. So I do believe in that wonderful saying by Buckminster Fuller, that, go out there and begin to shape our environment because it will shape us.
Yeah.
And that's absolutely what's needed.
Yeah. It's a very good point. Very good point. So let's start shaping. Continue.
Yeah.
Right?
Start with the earthworks. Start with
Exactly. Thanks again, Michael Judd. Such a pleasure to have you on, and to be continued.
Yes, absolutely. I've enjoyed it. Thank you for having me.
Me too. It's my pleasure. We'll talk soon.
Thanks.
This is Mitchell J. Rabin for A Better World. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. What a learning experience we had today on permaculture. Edible landscaping with a permaculture twist by Michael Judd. Also remember to go to our website, abetterworld.tv, and if you're not on the newsletter just yet, please join us, because we're doing a lot of great stuff here at A Better World, and we want your participation. So the best way to do that is getting on the newsletter. We have a lot of things going on at our website. Yes, a possibility to donate, which we always appreciate. Some of you wonderful souls are doing monthly donations that help us go and move forward and stay sustainable. We also have a whole part of our website about energy balancing, inner and outer energy, inner and outer ecology, as I like to discuss it. And please know we also have the listing of events of all sorts in the New York area and beyond, and we welcome you to participate in all these things we're doing. On September 13th, I want to let you know that a colleague and dear friend of mine, Kurt Johnson, has been spearheading an event that's going to be taking place that day, all day, on something called eco-ministry, as well as on interfaith and interspirituality, which is the theme of his latest book. Really interesting, of cross-fertilization, talking about things like fertility, of different cultures and different forms of thinking and different ideas about Godhead, about theism, about non-theism, about duality, about non-duality, you name it. But even though it's going to be inside a church, it's going to be outside the box. So I think any one of you who would like to know more, please get in touch with me at mjr@abetterworld.net, mjr@abetterworld.net. Not to mention that's the place to write to me to make comments on our shows and tell me what you want more of, or less of, for that matter. And I'll be giving a talk at that September 13th church. I think it's on Park Avenue, an amazing group of reverends just made it available to a number of us. It's really a wonderful opportunity, very, very kind and generous. I'll be speaking about sacred stewardship, awakening the soul to action, which is really the title of the book I'm working on, which takes a while to manufacture because of the limits on my time, but it is in process, and I will be giving some notion of that by the subjects of dealing with inner ecology and outer ecology and who we are relative to the planet and Gaia, and all as one part of a larger ecological living system, and the kind of attitude of respect and gratitude that really actually helps the soil get more fertile. That's a whole other dimension that we didn't really touch upon much today, but I do want to say that our thoughts have a material substrate to them, and they actually have a form of nourishment to them, as does our love. And the way we express these through our attitude toward each other and toward the earth herself has, I believe, a measurable effect on her health and well-being as well, simultaneously, as our own. So these will be some of the subjects, as well as a more concrete expression of sustainability while we move into a renewable energy foundation away from fossil fuel and into wind, solar, hydro, geothermal, and the like. So please know that will be happening. I'll be speaking about that on September 13th. Also, last, another Michael, Dr. Michael Cotton, will be in New York. I interviewed Michael back in March on the subject of higher brain living. I just returned from training in Chicago as an advanced facilitator. And this is really juicy stuff. Has to do with activating the prefrontal cortex by essentially helping to facilitate the growth of a certain kind of breath referred to as salutogenic. Salut, as in the French and the Latin and the Spanish and the Italian, meaning health. There's this type of breath that once engendered is a signal that the higher brain, the prefrontal cortex, is getting engaged. And this is a place where higher level creativity can and does take place. And we've got a fair amount of data in neuroscience about this. And it helps to loop us back into our natural cycles, because just like we were talking about earlier with Michael Judd about removing our own quote-unquote waste from the ecosystem, so too we have been short-circuiting our planet with the lack of engagement of our higher neurological functions. Well, guess what? Look at the world now. Look at the war. Look at the conflict. Look at the emphasis on plastics. Look at the destruction of our environment. All of these are functions of the reptilian brain, i.e., that the higher brain functions are not being engaged. And that means this is doing a disservice to our planet and to each other and to Gaia herself, which is our real mother and our real home. So it's an interesting way to think that just as we remove our waste, if we've removed a good portion of our brain from activity, we're not serving the planet properly. So on that note, we have a lot of fun coming up here in New York at the upcoming New Life Expo in the middle of October. Sure, I'll be giving a talk there about these kinds of things. So please make a point of joining me there. And we'll be doing a couple of demonstrations with Michael Cotton so you can see what it looks like when you engage this salutogenic breath and the body starts to really get turned on with the higher brain and by the higher brain. So with that said, I want to just thank you all again for joining me here at A Better World. And remember that Monday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, I'm on Progressive Radio Network, Gary Knoll's station, probably the best listened to, or certainly among them, online radio stations there is. And my show there these days is Progressive Film Hour with Mitchell J. Rabin, yours truly. And each week we feature a different film. What will be the next film? Go to the newsletter and you'll find out. Thanks again for joining, and I look forward to seeing you all next week.